knows I believe this every fiber of my being. We're posed. What I propose is it can be done. I think we're in a position to really make it happen. And my team and your team are already working closely together to light up the path forward here. Critical laws like the PRO Act to strengthen collective bargaining. On politics like prevailing and look, I guess I'm taking too much time, but
that's the guy that's winning. That's the guy that's winning. That's the weird, strange, overtly bizarre political scene to which we have arrived in, where that guy that can't articulate a message, very basic message, can't stay on message, can't explain himself to any real measure, is winning this race. He has come up with a political strategy, what I call coasting. It's called coasting. If you and I are playing a game of chess and your position has gotten so bad that every move that you make basically puts you in a worse and worse position, I don't really need to do anything with the exception of just allow you to do you, which is basically to off yourself. And this kind of slow bit of suicide that is taking place. Donald Trump has made a gamble. His gamble basically has been on the economy. Now, whether you made that gamble implicitly or explicitly, that gamble is now on the table, with the American public basically disagreeing with its choice. Fundamentally so. On not just one issue, multiple issues. That is going to be the thing that ends Donald Trump's presidency. When I look ahead, with the exception barring any kind of Joe Biden falling apart, let's say Joe Biden continued with the strategy of just coasting along, maybe staying in his basement, coming out with a statement here or there every now and then, not changing this dynamic that the overwhelming majority of the public voting for Joe Biden only because his name is not Donald Trump. Providing that stays in play, providing Joe Biden gets through these 3 debates, not landing any major punches, not doing anything amazing, just basically coasting through the debates, not getting hit too hard by the same token, not giving any really difficult punches, but basically allowing Trump and the position to which Trump finds himself to perpetuate itself going all the way up to the point of election, in which case Trump loses. Donald Trump is going to lose this presidential race. That's my prognostication. That's my bet. And I'm saying this, and I'm going to even explain why Donald Trump is going to lose this race through the lens of a poll that has just come out. Because this poll is basically saying what I think I've said for a while now, that I think is true, but it's showing itself to be that much more materially overt. I understand that there are a lot of people who would make the argument that, well, wait a minute, a lot of people were counting Donald Trump out the last time around. Well, when I had my channel, I think my channel came on after that. Like I've said on more than one occasion, I sat down with the map and I said, I don't know how Hillary Clinton gets her votes in order to win this race. People wagged their finger at me, Democrats, the adults in the room who apparently knew better, who were basically fundamentally, completely, utterly and entirely wrong. I was right on that front. Now, when I made the point that Jeremy Corbyn is going to be somewhat of a force in Britain, they said there's no way, he's not even going to become Labour leader. He became Labour leader. Now, Corbyn was weak. Sanders was also showing his weakness. And so you have this kind of weird thing with Joe Biden. But my only basic point is this. Donald Trump is being faced with difficulties. These difficulties would have allowed him to either show himself as being worthy of the presidency or not. But both things were there. When Obama was faced with the hurricane, he used that as one of his means of trying to show I am a president, I'm competent in my leadership, and regardless of what I'm doing that you guys may not like, at the very least, when we have an emergency, I can handle that particular emergency. Donald Trump has been given the same opportunity. The difference is Trump is incompetent. And being a president while you're incompetent is a very, very difficult thing to do. And that is basically what we are seeing taking place. Donald Trump may call all sorts of things witch hunts, and this channel has agreed with him on a lot of it. In fact, most of the things that people and Democrats have been throwing at him, this channel has basically said were nonsense. The Russia stuff was nonsense. I called it so. But by the same token, Donald Trump is getting himself in somewhat of a fix that he has a complete inability, competently, imaginatively, to get out of. And because of that, I think that's going to be the thing that basically tanks this presidency. I'm going to explain based on a poll that just came out. And to be honest, this poll is just telling what the other polls have basically said. That Trump is in a fix. And he doesn't seem to have the capacity to extricate himself from that fix. Yes, he's president. And yes, he could change course. And if he changes course, I would come on here, I would do a channel, I would say, hey, I think Donald Trump has changed course, but up to this point, he seems no capacity to do so. And because of such, that will be the thing that tanks Trump's presidency. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you for giving me the opportunity to do so. Now, I don't like Trump. I don't like Joe Biden either. I don't have a dog in this hunt. At this point, I'm just kind of pointing out Trump has difficulties that he doesn't necessarily seem to be able to solve. On top of those difficulties, he's been attacked viciously in a witch hunt on this Russia nonsense. But now he's just lost a Supreme Court lawsuit. And he, predictably, found a camera to stalk him.
And this is another hoax. This is purely political. I win at the federal level, and we won very decisively, and so they sent it into New York. And you know what's going on in New York. Everyone's leaving. It's turned out to be a hellhole. And they better do something about it because people are leaving New York. But this is a political witch hunt. It just continues. It's been from before I got here, when Obama and Biden and everybody else was spying on my campaign illegally. They were illegally spying on my campaign. And it's a...
Now, they were illegally spying on his campaign. The Crossfire Hurricane thing, we don't know this here in the United States because, if, to my understanding, the papers haven't necessarily covered it all that extensively. But in the UK, Christopher Steele lost a lawsuit. Basically, Steele said some things in that dossier that were not true. They wanted to get him for defamation of character, but they eventually got him for lying. And there were very elements in the dossier. So the dossier was bogus. The interaction between Christopher Steele and the FBI took place very early on, which allowed them to get that dodgy FISA warrant in order to spy on Carter Page, and by extension, other elements that Carter Page is talking to. Yeah, they were looking at the Trump's campaign. But that's secondary, and that's not the reason you're going to lose this race. You could have dealt with that, went through that, came out of that with all sorts of evidence saying that this is bogus. But your issue is not that. This is what the United States looks like right now. This is a depiction of it by the New York Times. These are the cases spiking all throughout the United States. Yeah, that's how bad it is. This is what it looks like now if you were doing kind of just a general idea on what the U.S. looks like regarding COVID cases. This is where we're at. 50,000 cases, over 50,000 cases. If you notice, back in April, look where it was. And look at where it is now. Now, you tell me, is that good leadership? Are those issues of policy? And if that is an issue of policy, is that not a policy failure? The death count for COVID-19 has started to go back up. Again, predicted because the slope has gone up. And as that curve has gone up, the expectation is that deaths will increase to be commensurate with the level that this number goes up. There's always going to be some kind of percentage associated with that. On top of that, even though the ability for us to treat these illnesses have gotten better, we are basically filling up our ICUs in some of these states, in Texas, Florida, etc., of people who have come down with this illness as the United States has pushed full speed ahead of reopening the economy. 30 million people currently sit without a job. And on top of 30 million people sitting without a job, 130 some thousand are dead. Millions are infected. And at this point, we're seeing this number continuously go up into the tens of thousands. Predictably, we can get to even over hundreds of thousands of people being infected a day. Again, basically not even getting past the first slope of the virus or the first wave of it. We're still within the context of that. That's not an act of God. That's an act of policy. That's the president making an explicit choice to take one policy over another policy. And that policy has been to cater to the owner class and to cater to his cronies that are basically part of the billionaire class that are never going to have to work at those stores or man those factories or do those things. Trump and the Republicans and the Democrats, for that matter, didn't necessarily want to make sure that the public remained whole during the course of this virus. They, more than anything else, wanted to ensure that the economy, specifically various companies, got part of the government coffers without necessarily attending to the workers. Now, the reason that you don't attend to the workers is because regardless of whatever the situation is, regardless of how bad this looks, with this many people infected, regardless of the skew where you get a disproportionate section of African Americans and Hispanics dying at much higher rates as opposed to whites, you want those people to be compelled, based on their own vulnerability and needs, to go back into a situation that may be against their best interests in regards to health. That's what you want. That's what you want to compel. And if people are made whole by having 80% of their income while they wait at home for this to run its course, you can't force those people back to work, because at that point, those people have a free choice. That free choice being given to them by the ability to stand there, having ends to the very least hold down the fort during the course of the storm, but you don't want that. And that's the catch. Now, from the standpoint of the public, the catch becomes, how is the president handling the responsibilities to which, and the problems to which he has been accosted with, just from the standpoint of history and time. And basically, shit happens. That type of aspect of things. He's failing. That failure is going to bite into him as he goes into the next election. Donald Trump has bet that he can get the economy back up and running, and that in getting the economy back up and running, that the public will be okay as long as the economy is back up and running. Meaning, if your economic numbers are good, we'll give you another term. That's his thinking. My argument is that thinking is wrong. I think it is wrong. Every poll that I have seen that has looked at Donald Trump's handling of this issue has shown the same thing. And it makes logical sense, right? Look at this. Do you approve of Donald Trump's handling of the virus? 67% disapprove. Overwhelming majority, 2/3, a little bit more than 2/3, say no. We completely disapprove of the way he's handled this. Why? Because those people care about their life and limb. Those people care about their relatives' life and limb. They have elderly people that they care about, that they love, that they have connections to, and they just may even be empathetic to understand that there are people out there dying of an illness and a virus, especially from the standpoint of the context of a disproportionate nature, being elderly, or having these kind of disparities of poverty. Let's go further into this. In the newest poll that was conducted by Ipsos in partnership with ABC News, Trump's approval rating on the job dealing with the COVID-19 has dropped another rung, driven by plunging support among independents and even Republicans. This is his own group. You don't believe that Republicans have older people in their families that they care about? Or for that matter, you don't believe that they care about their own life and limb, where they wouldn't necessarily want to put themselves in harm's way? Yes, you have right many Republicans that may agree with Trump and use this thing of a mask and everything else that's saying they don't believe it. But you get a lot more who don't want to take the chance of potentially dying in order to support Donald Trump. And they don't necessarily approve of the way that he's put economic priorities over the priorities of human beings' health. It's not just Democrats. It's also independents and Republicans. Trump's approval rating among independents landed at 26% in a survey, a sharp drop from 40% in June. 1 month. 1 month. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Think back for the moment to the election during the primaries. If you notice, the media and what the media was focused on Whether or not the public was entirely agreeing or not agreeing with the media, that's what the public, for the most part, focused on. So if Joe Biden and the narrative became, wow, Joe Biden won South Carolina, he's back in this thing, bam, all of a sudden the media changes, the perspective of the American changes in regards to electability. The media, in many respects, was driving the perspective of the American public. And because the perspective has been on two primary issues, protests, COVID-19, Donald Trump has been failing on both. Now, the catch becomes, does this go for 4 months? If this does indeed go for another 4 or 5 months, Trump loses this election handedly. With his own party, Republicans are less inclined to back him in the newest poll, with 78% backing the president. It was 90% in June. That's a 20-point drop among Republicans, a 20-point drop among independents. All of that on the very specific issue of his handling of COVID-19. If you see day after day that 50 and 60,000 people are dying, and you see that number going up day after day after day, those were policy choices. The public knows these were policy choices. The public fully understands that the president's point of view has been basically economy, even at the expense of human lives. They blame him for all of the deaths that are taking place for this virus, especially when they can see in contrast what has been taking place around the world. So they can look at Europe and they can see what Europe did, and they can look at the United States and see what the United States has done. And they know that we are an epicenter of that virus. They know that we had months in advance. And even if they don't fully entirely know about the months in advance or the connections with the World Health Organization, even if they don't know all of that stuff, they know that the number of deaths and the number of people infected should not have taken place. And knowing that, Trump gets blamed. Trump should get blamed because Trump is infinitely culpable for all of the deaths and the illness in this country as a result of this virus. The second point, race relations. Right here. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling race relations? 67% disapprove, 32% approve. Understand what this means. With all of the people that have been dying of the virus and people seeing the disproportionate skew, at the exact same time, your country is coming to this weird recognition of the other side of history. And in doing so, is trying to come to some idea of what's fair and what's right. I don't mean this in an absolute sense. I just mean this in the sense of trying to reconcile a social point of view in the same way that the point of view changed from like Negro and colored to black, and certain things become unacceptable versus acceptable. There becomes a new hegemonic norm into what's acceptable. But in doing so, this also gets into this notion of policy, politics, and those things that relate to the benefit or to the detriment of the African American community, not to mention the other racial minorities in the country. The public has started recognizing that, whites included. Because the public has started to recognize that very specific issue, it started to reconcile and regard issues of race and start having those larger conversations about race. Now, this is problematic if your name is Donald Trump. The perspective of America towards the Confederate statues has changed, the perspective towards Black Lives Matter, the perspective towards maybe not necessarily defund the police, but definitely in the perspective of African Americans, with the Washington Redskins getting to the point of potentially changing its name, with the point of view of these Confederate statues. All of these things have now come up for grabs and come up for conversation. And the person who's on the wrong side of that conversation is named Donald Trump. It's not just one problem that he's being hit with. Donald Trump is being available with multiple issues. And on both of those issues, he is dramatically in the wrong way. In fact, Donald Trump is so wrong in the way that he is on this particular issue, out of sorts with the American public, that many people will look at these issues and say, yeah, whether we do something about it legislatively or not, our perspective of this issue is getting a tweak. And in our perspective getting a tweak, we believe that Donald Trump is a racist. That's the other part. And with that, you get people who are independents, and he becomes radioactive. Now, whether that's enough to basically have somewhat of a landslide or not is almost secondary to the point that that's true. The moment that you get a large share of your public, the majority, changed their point of view on Black Lives Matter. And I don't even think they mean the group. I think they just mean African Americans in general. I think it's an allegory for African Americans. The moment that you get that to take place, and the moment that you get all of those questions to start come up about race relations and everything else, and you combine that with the COVID-19 thing, Trump fails on both issues. He fails on both issues spectacularly. The public considers what he's done as being a failure. Now, one catch and one caveat. Debates. If Joe Biden fails in the debates, Trump could win this race. If Donald Trump spins on a dime and starts doing things to try to ameliorate the hard edges of the capitalistic system in regards to the people who are out of a job, the 30 million people out of a job, or the number of people going to be kicked out of their homes, if he does something about that, maybe this changes. But right now, as we speak, you still have a ton of people who are on the streets. Those people who are on the streets have pathways now of action for when more people decide to go onto the streets, especially when the eviction numbers go up. You are going to have a crisis that goes beyond just the specifics of a Black Lives Matter protest. That is going to go into a thing of attacking a broad system itself, systemic issues itself. Now, if Trump does nothing about those things, I don't know how Trump gets elected. How do you have that many people out of a job, that many people who have been evicted, that many people who are already out on the streets agitating and protesting basically your administration? How do you get what seems to be your administration, what the public considers, inflaming racial tensions, and inflaming those racial tensions, finding you to be on the wrong side of that inflaming of racial tensions, and having hundreds of thousands of people basically die from a virus that you yourself had an inability, had the capacity to do something about, but didn't. I have no idea how you win an election after that. And considering that the polls are basically pointing to the same thing of, on race issues, Trump has failed. Mind you, this wasn't even something that was on the ballot. The very fact that it's on the ballot in and of itself shows that you've done something to provoke this. Even though nothing materially was different between Obama and Trump in regarding how cops were going about their jobs. Beyond that point, though, I don't see how Trump wins a race under all of those stressors. Again, this could change after the debates. This video may change on a dime if Trump does something spectacular in a debate, or Joe Biden fails miserably in a debate, or Donald Trump spins on a dime and starts doing things that attends to the real material needs of the population itself. Short of that, which it doesn't seem like he's going to do, I have a hard time believing he wins. I understand the ghost of Christmas past is out there.
So far to these national polls that continue to show Joe Biden with a significant lead over Trump in some of these key swing states.
Sure. President Trump responded in a tweet this morning. He said the fake news and phony fake suppression polls have never been worse. The lamestream media has gone crazy. Now, that's a very typical response from President Trump, and just saying that these polls are always wrong. They were wrong before. But the Trump campaign views this also. They've really kind of analyzed these national polls. And here's their response. They have three major flaws in the national polling that they feel inaccurately portrays support for Biden and Trump. One of the first things that they point out is the fact that these national polls show polling that asks questions of registered voters, but not likely voters. That is a huge oversight going into November. You always want to ask likely voters, whether they're voting or supporting one candidate or another. These polls do not address likely voters. A second thing is something that we've been hearing about a lot, the fact that these polls do not really question Republicans. So in the national polling, the campaign noted that
the ghost of Christmas past. This is the argument that Trump and his supporters make, right? Look, the polling once before was screwy. The difference is Donald Trump was an unknown quantity at the point where the polling was taken back in 2016. Nobody knew who Donald Trump was. Nobody knew what Donald Trump was going to do. Donald Trump had a question mark associated with him, regardless of what Clinton said about him. What the public did know and have a fully formed image of was Hillary Clinton. And what the public knew is that it did not want her. This time around, Donald Trump is the one in office. Donald Trump is somewhat of a defined quantity. And on top of Donald Trump being a defined quantity, part of that definition is him failing miserably and getting 100,000 people killed from this particular virus, on top of basically inflaming racial tensions. You must understand, you can make an argument to me that Donald Trump once before won despite the polling. But the problem is, this time around, Donald Trump has a lot of problems associated with his particular leadership that has evoked and caused a host of issues, none of which he's competent enough, or for that matter, has the imagination to solve. And because of such, the situation from this time is just fundamentally different than what it was back in 2015, 2016 when he was running that time around. Of course, I'm a person. I could be entirely wrong on this, but we will see. I suppose I should save this video and go back to this video at some point, but I have to be honest. I have a hard time. I will be shocked as shit if Donald Trump was able to win this race, given the variables that are at the disposal of the candidacies. And like I said, Joe Biden has one task: stay in his basement. He doesn't necessarily need to fully engage. That's sad, but that's true just from a political analytical standpoint. Stay in his basement. Let Trump be Trump. Basically, Nancy Pelosi give Trump what he wants, let Trump fail miserably, and just step into the limelight and shuffle into the White House as a result of who Trump is not, as opposed to who Joe Biden is. And I said that a little weirdly, but basically, to win without necessarily doing anything affirmative to get that win, to basically win just because of who you are not, being a default candidate. I'll leave this here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Baltazar, I'm so ready for Hillary Clinton VP announcement followed by Hillary Clinton murdering Joe Biden in cold blood at the convention stage. To huge applause, only to lose to Trump. Oh God, that's so sad. Hillary Clinton basically whacking Joe Biden at the Democratic convention on virtual. You see her in the background strangling Joe Biden, and then she goes through the whole process and loses once again to Trump. Frank Friel, I saw a story in local Arizona newspaper that said Mexico closed their border to the United States to stop the spread of COVID-19. So maybe Mexico will pay for the wall. Well, yeah. Well, Europe did also. If you tried to take a trip right now to Europe, I don't necessarily think they're allowing Americans in. Apparently, they were closing off their border to Americans because we are, again, the epicenter for this particular virus. I suppose you can't even say you blame them, per se. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.